In the cold, sterile glow of the hospital corridor, I stood frozen, clutching the crumpled discharge papers like a lifeline. The doctor's words echoed in my mind. Stage 4. It's aggressive. I'm sorry, Alex. I was 28, and my world had just imploded. I needed to escape the sympathetic gazes, the antiseptic smell, the brutal reminder of my mortality. Pushing through the heavy doors, I found myself in the bustling lobby, desperate for a breath of fresh air. As I rushed towards the exit, I collided with someone rounding the corner. Papers flew, and I stumbled, strong hands steadying me. I looked up, ready to snap, but the words died on my lips. Him. It was Jamie, my best friend from college, the one I'd fallen in love with but never had the courage to confess to. His eyes widened in surprise, taking in my disheveled state. Alex? What's wrong? I couldn't find the words, so I thrust the papers at him, my hands shaking. He scanned them, his expression darkening. When he looked up, there was a storm in his eyes. We'll fight this, Alex, he said, his voice steady, sure. I felt a spark of hope, something I hadn't felt in hours. But just as suddenly, panic surged. I couldn't drag him into this mess, this nightmare. I couldn't let him watch me waste away. I snatched the papers back, turning away. I can't, Jamie. I can't ask you to do that. I stumbled towards the elevator, my vision blurring. He caught up with me, grabbing my arm. You're not asking. I'm telling you. We'll fight this together. The elevator doors opened with a ping, and I stepped in, Jamie close behind. As the doors began to close, the lights flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness. The elevator jolted to a halt, and I heard Jamie's sharp intake of breath. We were trapped. The emergency light flicked on, casting eerie shadows on Jamie's face. He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear, yes, but also determination. And something else, something softer. Looks like you're stuck with me, Alex, he said, a hint of his familiar humor in his voice. I leaned against the cold metal wall, sliding down to the floor. Jamie sat beside me, his shoulder pressing against mine. I didn't know what the morning would bring, but for now, I was trapped in an elevator with the man I'd always loved. And despite everything, there was a strange comfort in that. As the hours ticked by, the elevator remained stubbornly still, suspended in the dark shaft. The emergency light cast a dim glow, just enough to see the outlines of each other's faces. Jamie and I sat shoulder to shoulder, the silence between us filled with unspoken words. I could feel the warmth of his body, a stark contrast to the cold seeping into my bones. I hugged my knees to my chest, trying to suppress the shiver that ran down my spine. Jamie noticed, of course. He always noticed the little things. Without a word, he shrugged off his jacket and draped it around my shoulders. His scent enveloped me, a mix of cologne and something uniquely him. It was comforting and unsettling all at once. Thanks, I murmured, pulling the jacket tighter around me. He just nodded, his eyes reflecting the dim light. Remember that time we got lost in the woods during that camping trip? Jamie asked suddenly, a small smile playing on his lips. I couldn't help but laugh softly, the memory pushing away the darkness for a moment. How could I forget? We ended up walking in circles for hours. But we found our way back eventually, Jamie said, his voice steady. We always do. There was a weight to his words, a promise. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the lines of worry etched around his eyes. He was scared just like I was, but he was trying to be strong for both of us. Suddenly, the elevator lurched, dropping a few feet before coming to an abrupt halt. My heart leaped into my throat, and I grabbed Jamie's arm, my fingers digging into his skin. He put his other arm around me, pulling me close. It's okay, he murmured, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We're okay. I nodded, trying to believe him. The elevator was old, the building even older. The thought of plummeting to the ground was terrifying, but being here with Jamie made it bearable. As the night wore on, we talked about everything and nothing. We laughed about old memories, cried over lost dreams, and whispered secrets we'd never shared before. Jamie confessed that he'd always regretted not telling me how he felt before we drifted apart. I looked at him, stunned. "You felt something for me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, a soft smile on his lips. "I did. I do." Those words hung in the air between us, a confession that changed everything. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with his jacket. For the first time since the doctor's office, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us even in the face of the unknown. As the night wore on, the confines of the elevator began to feel less like a trap and more like a cocoon, shielding us from the harsh reality waiting outside. Jamie's admission had shifted something between us, opening a door to a conversation we'd both been too afraid to have for years. I lifted my head from his shoulder, turning to face him. His eyes were soft, vulnerable, and I could see the question lingering in their depths. "I felt something for you too, Jamie," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Back then and now." His eyes widened slightly, surprise and relief warring in their depths. He reached up, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. His touch was gentle, tender, and it sent a shiver down my spine. This was uncharted territory for us, a line we'd never crossed before. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes briefly before opening them to meet his gaze. "I was scared," I admitted. "I didn't want to risk losing you. Our friendship meant too much to me." Jamie's expression softened, and he leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. "You wouldn't have lost me, Alex," he murmured. "You couldn't have." His breath was warm on my face, his words a promise that wrapped around my heart, squeezing tightly. I believed him. In that moment, suspended in the dark, I believed every word. But reality was a cruel mistress, always lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce. My diagnosis hung over us like a dark cloud, a constant reminder of the ticking clock. I pulled back slightly, the weight of my news pressing down on me. "Jamie," I started, my voice shaking. "The cancer, it's aggressive. I don't know how much time I have left." Jamie's expression darkened, and he took my hands in his, squeezing them tightly. "Then we fight," he said, his voice fierce. "We fight with everything we have. And no matter what happens, Alex, we face it together. You and me, okay?" His words were a lifeline, a beacon of hope in the storm that threatened to consume me. I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. "You and me," I echoed. Suddenly, the elevator lurched again, the lights flickering on briefly before plunging us back into darkness. My heart raced, but Jamie's grip on my hands tightened, grounding me. "We're okay," he murmured, his voice steady. And in that moment, I believed him. Despite the fear, the uncertainty, the elevator's stubborn refusal to move, I believed that with Jamie by my side, I could face anything, even the scariest battle of my life. As the hours ticked by, we sat in comfortable silence, our shoulders pressed together, our hands entwined. The elevator became our sanctuary, a place where we could be honest, vulnerable, and real with each other. And as the first light of dawn began to filter through the crack in the elevator doors, I realized that no matter what happened, no matter what the future held, I was grateful for this night, grateful for the truths we'd shared, the promises we'd made, and the love that had blossomed in the dark. But with the light came a new set of challenges, a new set of fears. As the elevator finally groaned to life, inching its way back to the ground floor, I couldn't help but wonder what the morning would bring. Would our confessions hold up in the light of day? Would our promises remain steadfast in the face of reality? Only time would tell. But for now, with Jamie's hand in mine, I was ready to face whatever came our way, together. As the elevator finally reached the ground floor with a reluctant ding, the doors slid open to reveal the lobby bathed in the soft glow of morning light. Jamie and I stepped out, blinking against the brightness, our hands still entwined. The lobby was eerily quiet, the usual bustle of the hospital not yet begun. It felt like we were stepping into a new world, a world where our confessions and promises would be tested. Jamie turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady. "Sure." I took a deep breath, nodding. "Ready?" I echoed, squeezing his hand tightly. Together, we walked towards the exit, our steps echoing in the silent lobby. The automatic doors slid open, and we stepped out into the crisp morning air. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. But reality was waiting just around the corner, ready to challenge our newfound resolve. As we made our way to the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. The world outside the elevator was a harsh reminder of the battle that lay ahead. Jamie seemed to sense my turmoil, his thumb rubbing soothing circles on the back of my hand. "We'll get through this, Alex," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "One step at a time." But the first step was a doozy. As we approached Jamie's car, I noticed a figure leaning against it, arms crossed, expression stormy. It was Marcus, Jamie's older brother, and his polar opposite in every way. Where Jamie was warm and open, Marcus was cold and guarded. He straightened up as we approached, his eyes narrowing as they landed on our entwined hands. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, his voice a low growl. Jamie's grip on my hand tightened, a silent show of support. "Not now, Marcus," Jamie said, his voice firm. But Marcus was not one to be deterred. He looked at me, his expression softening slightly. "Is it true, Alex? What I heard about your diagnosis?" I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Marcus's expression darkened, and he looked back at Jamie. "And you think now is the time to start something like this?" he asked, his voice accusing. "He needs to focus on his health, Jamie, not on some fling." Jamie's expression darkened, and he stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "This is not a fling, Marcus," he said, his voice firm. "And it's not your place to decide what Alex needs. That's up to him. And me. Together." Marcus's eyes widened slightly, surprise and something else flickering in their depths. He looked back at me, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you want, Alex?" he asked, his voice softer than before. I nodded, my voice steady. "It is," I said, my gaze flicking to Jamie. "We want to face this together." Marcus was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "All right," he said, his voice gruff. "But if you hurt him, Jamie, you'll have me to answer to." Jamie nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "I won't hurt him, Marcus," he said, his voice steady. "I promise." As we drove away from the hospital, the sun rising higher in the sky, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Despite Marcus's initial resistance, he'd come around, offering his support in his own gruff way. It was a reminder that we weren't alone in this fight, that we had people in our corner, ready to support us every step of the way. But even as hope blossomed in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. The battle ahead was daunting, the road uncertain. But with Jamie by my side, I was ready to face whatever came our way. Together we would fight. Together we would overcome. Or so I hoped. As days turned into weeks, Jamie and I settled into a new rhythm. A dance of doctor's appointments, treatments, and stolen moments of normalcy. The elevator night had become a turning point, a catalyst that propelled us into uncharted territory. Our relationship was no longer just a confession in the dark. It was a reality we faced together in the light of day. But even as we navigated this new world, the shadow of my diagnosis loomed over us, a constant reminder of the ticking clock. One afternoon, as we sat in the chemo lounge, Jamie's laptop opened to a spreadsheet of treatment options and clinical trials. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Jamie had put his life on hold for me, his job as a graphic designer taking a backseat to my illness. I watched him, his brow furrowed in concentration, his eyes scanning the screen with determination. He was fighting for me with every weapon he could find. "Jamie," I said softly, my voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "You don't have to do this, you know," I said, gesturing to the laptop. You don't have to put your life on hold for me. Jamie's expression softened, and he reached out, taking my hand in his. I want to, Alex, he said, his voice firm. This is where I want to be. With you. Fighting with you. His words were a balm to my soul, a soothing reminder of the promise we'd made in the elevator. Together. But even as his words warmed my heart, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. The thought of Jamie watching me waste away, of him losing me piece by piece, was unbearable. I looked down at our entwined hands, his strong and steady, mine pale and bruised from the 4 needles. How long would it be before my hand was too weak to hold his? Before my body was too frail to stand by his side? As if sensing my turmoil, Jamie squeezed my hand, his thumb rubbing soothing circles on my skin. Hey, he said softly, his voice drawing my gaze back to his. Remember what we said in the elevator? One step at a time, right? I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. One step at a time, I echoed, taking a deep breath. He was right. I couldn't control the future, couldn't predict the outcome of this battle. But I could control the present, could choose to fight, to hope, to love. And with Jamie by my side, I was ready to take the next step, whatever it may be. Just then, a nurse approached us, a clipboard in her hand. Alex, she said, her voice gentle, your test results are in. The doctor would like to see you. My heart leaped into my throat, a familiar wave of fear crashing over me. Jamie's grip on my hand tightened, grounding me. We're in this together, remember? He murmured, his voice steady. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Together we stood, facing the nurse. Together we walked down the hall, our steps echoing in the sterile corridor. Together, we stepped into the doctor's office, ready to face whatever news awaited us. As we sat down, the doctor looked at us, his expression unreadable. Alex, he said, his voice serious, your test results are unexpected. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing with possibilities. What did he mean, unexpected? Was it good? Bad? Jamie's hand in mine was a lifeline, a steady presence in the storm of my thoughts. The doctor looked down at the papers in his hand, then back up at us. The tumors, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. They're shrinking. It's not a cure, not yet. But it's a start. A good start. His words hung in the air, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I looked at Jamie, his eyes wide with shock and joy. We'd done it. We'd fought and we'd won. This battle, at least. As we left the doctor's office, hand in hand, I couldn't help but think back to the elevator, to the night that had started it all. We'd been trapped, Jamie and I, trapped in the dark, trapped in our fears. But we'd found our way out, together, and as we stepped out into the sunlight, ready to face whatever came next, I knew that no matter what, no matter where life took us, we would face it together. For we were no longer just Alex and Jamie, best friends turned lovers. We were warriors, battle-scarred and victorious. We were a testament to love, to hope, to the power of together. And as we looked to the future, hand in hand, I knew that whatever came our way, we would face it. Together, just as we'd promised in the elevator. Just as we'd proven in the light of day. Together, always.